Hello, I'm Ked Sanders, and I'm a resident of Jenkins. I've been a resident most of my life of the Jenkins communities, which are comprised of Jenkins, Burdine, Dunham, and McRoberts. I was born and reared in McRoberts. And I started my mining career in 1963, so that's 40 years ago. But compared to the career of our guest today, I'm a relative newcomer. This is a good friend of mine, Noll Davis, and I had the pleasure of working for Noll back about 30 years ago at one of the Beth Elkhorn mines down on Elkhorn Creek. It's mine number 26. I was a new man there, and Noll was a mine foreman at that time. And Noll has had a very interesting career in coal mining, going back to the 1930s, and he's seen a lot of changes in his lifetime, and we'd like to talk to him today about his mining career and also about his when he came to the community and what the community life was like during that era. Noll, when did you first come to Jenkins?
We moved here in 1926.
And where did you come from?
We came from, actually Calvin, Virginia. Of course, I was born in Rhodey, Virginia, and my dad moved from Rhodey to Calvin for the Blackwood Coal Company. And then when this started up in the big way, they moved over here. 1926 in August, I believe.
So was coal mining on the decline over in that area, and you wanted to move to a more modern town, or what was the reason for moving over here?
Yeah, this was a big opportunity for people, in the mines. When the Jenkins started, it's well known and always had a good name. It was a good community. And my brothers came first, and finally they persuaded my dad to come over, so that's the way we wound up over here.
How many was in your family?
There were 8 of us, 4 boys and 4 girls. Big family.
Yeah. And you moved to what part of the Jenkins area?
We moved to Improvement Branch, and that's what it's still called today, Improvement Branch. And the question must come up why it got that name. I don't really know, but I suspect it was because of the various kind of houses they built up there. Mm-hmm. It was the first community that had 4 or 5 different kinds of houses, styles,
You live there today?
Still live there.
The same house?
Same old house.
Well, great. How old were you when you came here?
I was about 7 and a half, something like that. I wasn't hardly 8 years old.
Had you been enrolled in school in Virginia?
Started for just a few months, and then we moved over here then.
Do you remember your first day in school here?
Yeah, I sure do.
Who was your teacher?
Her first name I don't recall, but there was 2 of these girls, both of them teachers. And Miss Rice is all I ever knew her by.
I remember when I was a kid in school, we didn't know the teacher's first name. All we knew was Mr. or Miss, and probably the same thing during your era. What was it like that first day of school here?
Well, I guess about like any other ordinary day, we all got acquainted. And she introduced herself, and we started from there. And then I did have an interesting experience shortly after we started the school that Mr. Long was the superintendent. I don't remember his first name, but he visited all the schools pretty regular. And he was there one day, and the teacher, I heard her tell him, said, "I want you to hear this child read." And I never suspected she was talking about me. And so she come over there and opened the book and said, I was named after my dad. She said, "Junior, I want you to read something for Mr. Long." So I took it and read. And he asked me to multiply and divide and subtract and everything. I'd already learned all that. My sisters taught me before ever I went to school. And he thought it was amazing, you know. He said, "I want you to put this boy in 3rd grade." But I needed to. I was almost 8. And that's getting a slow start. And in Virginia at that time, you couldn't start till you was about 8.
So you got to skip 2 grades.
Yeah, I got skipped 2.
That's every school kid's dream.
Yeah, that'd give me a jump start.
So what was it like growing up in Dunham during that era?
Well, everybody, even when I first remember people, why, everybody over here seemed to know everybody else. And the neighbors were good, and it's just a good community to live in.
What'd you do for recreation?
Well, we'd pitch horseshoes, pass ball, and play checkers sometime. Had a chinning bar. That was a big time thing for boys at my age then. Everybody had to learn to chin at least 50.
Just to prove your manhood.
Prove you had some muscle.
As you got older, well, you went through school at Dunham up to what grade?
Up to the 8th grade.
Then from there?
There to Jenkins High School.
So they run a bus up to Dunham to pick you up, did they?
Not the first semester. We had to walk it. And that meant rain or shine, snow, sleet, or hail, whatever.
Yeah.
And nobody even thought twice about anything like that.
So what, did you walk the railroad track?
No, we wouldn't walk the railroad. They didn't want us to. And there wasn't that much traffic then. It was dirt road. And one of my neighbors, the old boy I grew up with, we didn't jog, we run. We got to where we could run the whole distance to Dunham. We didn't think, especially, we didn't run to school, but we sure run back home. And a lot of people did, boys did, even some girls.
Which mine did your dad work in?
He started in 206. That's one that, well, they still what they call 206 Holler, you know. And right over across the creek opposite to that was number 6.
A picture here of Dunham as it was half a century ago, and that was probably very similar back then, except the prep plant was built when?
It was about 41 when it opened there. They started, I guess a year before. Didn't they do it about a year or 2 years?
So this area here was near the 207 mine, right?
Yeah, the 207 mine was up in this holler to the left here, to the right of this conveyor line going up to the slate dump. And there was 2 portals up that way. Number 8 went to the left, and number 7 to the right. Number 6 was down about a half a mile back toward the town, you know, from this store. Back down the other way, and then on below it was number 5 mines. And of course, number 4 it was here in Jenkins, down behind the machine shops.
This building right here, does that bring back some fond memories?
It sure does. That store had, there's a basement, and then the ground level, and then the 2nd floor. And you could find anything you wanted. If it didn't, it'd be in the big store in town in Jenkins where it had everything. Furniture, hardware, horseshoes, anything you needed, you could find it there. Any kind of clothes. And then this was a community. The left side on the 2nd floor was a community hall. And we had square dances there, and it was once used for...
Did you have jukeboxes or live music?
I had live music. We had a little band we were on, and on payday nights especially, while I was still going to high school, and we'd play, and the moonshine liquor was flowing freely. You could buy a pint for a quarter, and there'd always be plenty of good moonshiners around to sell you liquor.
So
when they got liquored up, around the square dances and hooping and hollering, beats anything you can see on TV today.
So these mining communities were pretty well self-contained. They hadn't got anything you needed there. What about theaters?
Well, over to the left of this, there's a road went between this building, and the doctor's office was out on the left, and on the right was the script office, and then to the left of the doctor's office was the recreation building. Had a fountain, pool hall, barber shop, and it was always a big attraction to everybody. It was widely used, and
Just by comparison, what did it cost to get in a movie back then? I know today, I've not been to a movie in a while, it probably cost several dollars to go to a movie. What did it cost you then as a kid to
I
go to the
believe,
show?
I believe as a child it'd have been 10 cents. I'm not quite sure. My memory's not that good, but
I guess 10
the
cents
way
was
we
a lot
got
of money.
in, it was a lot of money. There was a hot dog stand used to sit over here, go along and get a big old hot dog. I mean one deluxe, I called it, for a nickel. Hamburger for a dime. They even had a nickel hamburger. And the Greek guy run this hamburger place. But over there to get in the theater where us boys got in, Consol, in order to get rid of the rats, we had a lot of rats, growing up. Everybody had chickens, hogs, farmed a little, and barns, some people. And anywhere you had something like that, you had rats. So in order to reduce the rat population, the theater let you go to the show for 3 rat tails. Well, you kill a rat and chop his tail off, and that's all it took.
Would you trap the rats or shoot them? Or
Shoot
what?
them. We'd shoot them with 22 short, small little short cartridge they used back then. Cost about $0.25 a box. And they was plentiful, and everybody was out popping the rats, when they, for the fun of it, to get rid of the rat population.
Well, you was talking about everybody having livestock back then. These company houses had very small lots. Where'd you keep the livestock?
Well, most people, we had a cow pasture, and there was cow barns that the company built. And in Dunham, he's up on past his plain on the right. You had a big barn sitting over here, horse barn when I was a boy, where they used horses in the mines. And the cow pasture, people kept their cows over there in it, and the barns were there too. And some people had, they wouldn't allow you to build a barn then behind your house, or even close to it. So you had to either use that or not have a cow.
Mm-hmm.
And most people back then had come off of farms, and they were used to providing for themselves, raise their own chickens, hogs, even butcher cows and sheep, and pretty self-sufficient people were then.
And what about gardening and farming? Did you have a place for that?
Yeah, everybody had a garden, and some people even had big fields. You could company would lease you all the land you wanted for. They give you a lifetime lease for $1 back then, and about everybody, very few people I can recall that didn't raise a garden. And during the Depression days, the people that didn't do that didn't eat too well, because we called it the Hoover Depression, after Herbert Hoover. And even the Red Cross fed people right here in Jenkins, provided some of them with their clothes.
What was it like
Shoes.
living in the mining community compared to the rest of the United States when the Depression was going on?
Well, we were better off than most, and especially large cities where they had big soup lines like Chicago and New York, Philadelphia, and some of the western cities where you'd see it on Fox News at the theater once a week on Friday if you got to go to the theater, and on those 3 rat tails you get the news showing all these soup lines in Chicago and New York. It was a pitiful time, and the nearby coal communities in Virginia, they would be idle so long that the cars parked on the railroad track, the wheels would be rusted, the rails rusted, and most houses boarded up. Those people that was raised on farms, they left, they just closed them down. There wasn't a market for coal, but Jenkins survived that well. They done better than other than Benham and Lynch, Kentucky. Why, we about the only one I can recall, it come to it pretty good, I think.
So typical coal mining family, most of them have pretty good sized families, a lot of kids, and as a supplement to the coal mining wages, most every family did some farming, gardening, and raising livestock. And I remember my grandma used to say, we used to eat all we can and can all we can't. And I remember we used to do a lot of canning when I was a kid, and through the summer we'd eat out of the garden, but through the wintertime there'd be hundreds of jars of canned stuff in the basement to feed us all through the wintertime. So I guess that was typical in the coal mining communities during that period.
Yeah, it was. And you see people out picking blackberries and canning beans and butchering their own hogs and killing their own chickens. But they didn't wait on somebody to feed them. Most people pretty well provided for themselves, but there was a few that had to be helped by the Red Cross right here in the Jenkins area. But most people made it pretty good.
So did you graduate from Jenkins High School?
Well, it's kind of a top secret with me, because then the job was more important than the education. And I was courting pretty heavy, and in my senior year, well, I dropped out the first semester when I got the promise of that job, the old 207, where I've got the picture here with the crew I started with.
So you started mining in 1939?
Actually in 38.
38.
Later, part of 38. Yeah, this is the crew I started with, 207 at Dunham. To the left of the plant as you go up in Dunham. And so this person here is my father-in-law, Steve Evanoff. And the guy here was my brother-in-law, John McCown. And the interesting tale about John, hadn't been working long. He said, we went into work one morning, he said, son, the first thing you do, well, I think it's the first day we worked together, and he said, you climb up on the bug dust, that's the cuttings where it's cut out of the coal, and burn your gas off. You notice in this picture, everybody wearing carbide lamps, that's what we used. He reached up and turned that water on that carbide lamp, and the blaze shot out, and he held it up to the roof, and it lit enough methane to burn. It just swoosh, made a big sound, went over both of us, didn't burn either one of us, but it scared us about half to death. And of course, from the foreman, this guy here, Wade Collins, Wade found out about it, and he come around and he said, McCown, don't you do nothing like that anymore. He said, I'll take care of testing for the gas in this section. And he's the only one, that carried the methane, one of the methane detectors, the flame safety lamp, which is the most reliable of all to me, because I carried them for years, and I really believe in them. You can at least test for oxygen deficiency or methane, and methane detectors, a modern one, you have to have separate ones for bad air, low oxygen, and methane. Well, that's kind of off the subject, but still, it brings all that to mind.
Is that where you got the name Fire Boss?
Yeah, that's where they got the Fire Boss.
You go in there and burn the methane off.
Yeah.
So the ventilation apparently was not real good.
Not sweeping the face, no. It past your last open crosscut, there wasn't no air really, very little. But not in this particular mine. When I started, though, we close to the big fan, had good air.
I noticed one of the guys in here got a breast auger, so had the mining not mechanized at that time to put mechanical coal drills in there?
No, this auger that you can see over here, this man's got his auger. You brought that out at the end of your shift. That's what you drilled your coal with. You drilled, shot the coal, or put your explosive in it, and we called it shooting the coal, and you load it with a big fish shovel. So number 5 was the most used shovel for shoveling coal.
So you started out hand loading. What in a typical day? How much coal could you load?
Well, I never was no big coal loader, but I made a pretty good living. I loaded, if I got four 3-ton cars, I was pretty well satisfied. You'd load a car, maybe 2 cars of rock for nothing. And if I got that much, I was satisfied. But we had people that was load as much as 40 or 50 tons in a day with a shovel. It sounds unbelievable. It is nowadays.
But they didn't have to load any rock.
Well, as far as I know, he didn't have any rock because this guy, the champion coal loader, was named Fred Raines, and he's in that picture. And he'd load as high as 40, and up as his top was 50 tons. But the average coal loader loaded about 10, 15 ton, car or 2 of rock.
So what did you get paid? Get paid by the hour, by the ton, or what?
66 cents a ton.
Was that pretty good wages?
Well, it's better than the hourly rate, but what they call company men got their top wage, a motor operator or locomotive operator, we call them motormen, they got $5.76 a day. And the track man, timber man got $5.60 a day. And a helper got $5.36. So you can load 10 ton of coal, it's 66 cents a ton, make $6.60. That's pretty good money.
You make a lot more than the hourly workers.
The hourly worker was.
How did they determine exactly how much coal that you personally had loaded?
Well, you had your check number and a little round check. You used that to check in and out of the mines, and it was shaped different from the one you hung on the car of coal. When you load the car of coal, you hung your check number on it, and it went to the plant, and they weighed it and credited you with whatever you had in that car. It'd be around 3 to 4 tons. And
how did you know for sure you was getting a fair shake?
Well, I had to take their word for it.
Did you have anybody there to check to make sure the check weighman was accurate?
The check weighman was usually a reliable person, and I mean most of us trusted him.
Yeah.
When the company weighed it, back before, see, the union was only about 1.5 years, 2 years old when I started. And later on, the union made sure that you got the right tonnage for what you load. I never did suspect the company, though, shortchanging me, but some people did. But if you got dirt in your coal or rock, a handful of rock, what the inspector, Jake Smith, you might remember him, and if he got a handful of rock off your car of coal, he'd throw it away. He'd go to the slate dump.
The whole car?
Whole car. So you made sure I did. I never did lose a car, but I know plenty of people that did.
Now this rock you were talking about, that was there a draw rock or a middle parting in the coal, or where was this rock? How'd you get it out?
Here's a middle rock, and they had a cutting machine, like a chainsaw today is best replica of an old cutting machine with that bar. You know, it had a big long bar, at that time about 8 feet was maximum. And if there was rock in the middle of the coal, which this seemed to begin with didn't have rock, it had a rash, it looked like coal. And when you cut it out, you had to look at it good to tell it wasn't coal. But as the seam spread out, the mines got further and further underground while we started picking up that rock, a middle man they called it. And it first began about 1 inch or 2 and finally be up to 6, then finally up to 10 or 12. And further back we went toward Long Fork and back in behind Hemp Hill over yonder, where the bigger that rock got. And then driving back from number 5 mine on Kentucky River, the rock got real big. It got up to 2 and 3 feet of middle parting. Big enough you had to drill and shoot it separately. But the machine cut it to give you a breaking space in there. So when you drilled your holes in the coal, you could drill and have a place for the coal to expand when the explosive went off.
This cutting machine, was it rubber tired or track mounted?
Track mounted, everything.
So then they run the track all the way up to the face,
Right,
every working place.
Every working place.
And they cut the rock out, then you had to go in there and load the rock by hand, send what typically a ton or so of rock.
No, it'd be these 3-4 ton cars. They had two style cars. One of them held 3 ton level. The other one held 4, and they named that big car a Hoover car. That's typical, miners at that time. And it's a hard time for everybody like to get the Hoover car. You get more coal on it. But you had to load that out, and
After you load the rock out, then did you drill your own coal?
you drilled your own coal. The company had a drill crew would drill your top holes. In the beginning now, before my time, you drilled them too, and occasionally you'd have a cut where they missed it and didn't drill the top holes. You'd have to drill them too. But typically a coal loader drilled the bottom, and you had to shoot one bottom hole, one top hole, mix the two separate seams of coal. That's the way the company required it. You drilled it, put your explosives in it, and shot it. But the interesting thing, before you did this, you loaded the rock, and they furnished you a broom, and you had to take a long handled thing like a hoe, only it's longer handled than a hoe, and reach in there in that cutting and rake any rock it fell down, take a bar and punch it down even in the back of that cut. And then you rake that out, loaded that out by hand, and swept it with a broom. And then put plank down, boards, and shovel off of it to keep rock out of it. And that was critical too for a coal loader. If they caught you shoveling off that naked bottom 3 times, and you'd be out of a job. There wasn't no saving you either. The union couldn't save you.
How many cuts would you get in a day to get your 10 or 12 ton average?
Well, one cut would easily do that. And some of the coal got high enough, and so it'd take 2 men to clean it up. It'd be up 40 or 50 ton like that champion loader loaded by itself. Me and my buddy worked together, and that's all we could do to clean up the cut and get around 30 ton out of it.
That was my next question. Did you have a buddy working with you in there all the time?
Well, if you was in what they call wide rooms, it took most of the time 2 men in one place. But in the heading or advanced work, there's one person always. Because it wouldn't be as wide and wouldn't be as much coal in it.
You remember your first day in the mines?
Yeah, sure do.
How'd it go?
Well, I thought I could run a mile with a horse and chin 100 times, so I went to work with a 57-year-old man. I thought that was old age to me, I said, I felt sorry for him having to work at that age. But all the people, like you see in this photograph, other than 3 of us, was high school age. They're all older people, and there is a man in that picture there was in his 70s, and he loaded the cut of coal out by himself every day, 70-year-old man. But anyhow, I went to work with this 57-year-old, and I thought I could shovel with anybody, but I found out what men was when I started.
That separated the men from boys.
It sure did. And he was drilling, get down on his knees and drill these bottom holes with that old logger. And I hadn't been working but 2 or 3 days. I said, let me do that. He looked up at me, he said, son, your days are coming. He wouldn't let me do it. He knowed I couldn't, but he's modest enough to not tell me that. And after I'd worked, I guess a couple of months, well, I kept asking him. So one day he let me take that auger. He'd sit down and talk to me and drill all the time, drill that hole all the way up, about 7 or 8 foot hole. And it looked so easy, so I got down on my knees, started drilling. I drilled about that far, and I found out it took muscles I didn't have. And I worked a year before I could do that, sit down and drill a hole all the way up.
Did you ever get to work any with your dad in the same section or same place?
I worked, I was on the section where he was one time, but we didn't get to work together. But he was a timber, and I was laying track, and he's doing one thing, me another. But that was just temporary arrangement, and because he worked in number 6 mine all the time, and I worked in number 7. See, eventually number 7 took over everything. Number 6, number 4, and some of the mines in Mac Roberts all was coupled in with number 7. And my dad's working one place and me another. But I worked around my brothers. I had 3 brothers that was already experienced miners when I started.
What about roof support? What did you use then?
Well, strangely, in the beginning here, all this coal was big high coal, what we call high coal, 7, 8, 9, 10, even up to 12 feet high. And we used timbers for safety posts, you know. When you load your cutout, you had a little band that all the coal loaders called it a mother coal. It's kind of a bone, like seam, little thin seam of coal. And they'd be about 18 inches to 30 inches above that. And the company made you stay under that little bone seam, and that left the coal for the roof support. And he's one of the best I ever worked under. Because coal don't behave like rock does. When rock starts to break, it'll fleek and crack and go on, but coal will do that in a whole lot lighter way and start way with the slightest movement in the roof would make that coal start creaking and popping, little flakes flying off. We give you good warning, and most slate top wouldn't do that. So that was the main support. Was that coal.
Did you have a lot of injuries and fatalities and disabilities then?
Not in Consol's lines. I can't even recall anybody ever being killed by a slate fall coal loader. In my career, what time I worked as a coal loader, and I was around here I know about all these mines. Eventually I worked in nearly all of them, and they did have people killed later now, but after began mechanical mining and took the coal all the way to the rock. When it got lower, they had to. But as long as they had that coal top, they had a real good roof. And some of it had been standing for years when I started, just good as ever. The main line, a lot of it was coal top.
So after you'd worked there for 2 or 3 years, they started building that preparation plant.
Yeah.
How did the mining technique change after they put the preparation plant online?
Well, he's already experimenting with mechanical mining, and the number 6 mine was the leader then among all the mines. They tried the new stuff, new methods, and they had the whaley, what they call a whaley. It was a rock loading machine, and then they had one called a Jonah. I guess you remember some of the names that they had then. And they began, experimenting before the plant was built, because after we got mechanical mining, we started loading everything, rock and all, because that plant would separate the rock from the coal. And about the time the plant was built, we was pretty well mechanized in all the mines. Coal loaders, they just phased them out one by one, let people work till they retired, first one thing and another, and introduced it so gradually. It wasn't no radical change, and went over pretty good.
How many hours was in a typical work day for you to go in and hand load before the mines become mechanized?
Well, John L. Lewis got that 7-hour work day, and of course everybody was tickled to death with that. But at that time, there wasn't no portal pay in the contract. And we used to far back in the mines, well, they'd get us in pretty good, but coming out, if there's a big 100 cars of coal loaded or sitting on a side track where it'd been loaded and parked during the day, or they had several of those, they'd park the man trip and bring the coal out. And that 7-hour day would wind up being 9 or 10 hours.
But you just got paid for the tons you loaded.
For the tons you loaded in 7 hours. And then by the time we got mechanized then, they got the contract with portal to portal pay, and that started bringing them out promptly. It was an interesting thing to go through, and I lived through all of that and was lucky, I guess, I didn't get killed or maimed.
In your career, what would you say is the single most important thing in mining for the men and for the mining industry and all concerned? What was the most important thing?
I think when they introduced the federal mine code and the state mine laws, they would come along with it too and gradually strengthen the laws, and you start having better ventilation, better safety, better air to work in, and that was the biggest of all, I think. To me, in my own thinking, I put that as number one.
Did you make better money as a hand loader or in the mechanical mines?
Well, at the time, they brought the wages up somewhat, you know. By the time I'd started hourly work, and coal loaders, a good coal loader made way ahead of the hourly wage though. For a long time, it's way up in the 50s before wages got up to where they was beating some of the coal loaders back in the 40s, you know.
Back in the, let's say, the 30s and 20s, could a coal mining family aspire for their kids to go to college?
Very little. The people didn't have the desire to be educated then, it's like you would have now, because the brute work, and strong back and weak mind was the main requirement, and that held people back. I mean, from wanting to become better educated, because it was rare that somebody went to college. Some did, but not many. In fact, when the job was more critical around here, you know, coal mining was it. Other than farming, if you didn't have a job in the mine, you didn't have any money.
I know the federal coal mining laws went into effect in 1969. Prior to that, what kind of enforcement did you have in the coal mine?
Well, I think CONSOL was way ahead of their time, because they had standards for everything. You didn't just haphazardly do things. They had a way to do it, and it was good. Because I still have a book of standards that they published in the 1920s. Most of it is right in use today. That's how far above average they was then, because their track was picture perfect in the mine. The trolley wire was hung perfectly. They had H beams on 4-foot centers on the main line because they meant for it to stay there. They didn't want to be, even in good top, they went ahead and put these crossbars, steel H beams. And to go in their mine and look at it, it had the proper clearance, it's well rock dusted, and all the switches would be illuminated, rock dusted good around them, so you could see them good. They had, so the other mines though wasn't that fortunate, because of course U.S. Steel, they had good mines, and Benham, I think that's Wisconsin Steel owned it at that time. They had high standards too, both of them companies did. But them and CONSOL, we had about as good a safety before '69 as we did after. I mean,
So you had
generally
already,
speaking.
your company had already set the standard that the federal agencies adapted, or they adopted those standards and just put it into law.
Yeah,
But it was enforced across the board to the big mines and the small mines and everybody.
yeah. Yeah, they took a lot of the federal code right out of our standards. Because I was familiar with both, and I was pleased to see it come, because it was general, you know, all over the country. And it started an upward spiral and doing things better. And I think it had a big bearing on mines developing into safer places to work and healthier places to work. Because once you started controlling the dust and getting the proper ventilation, it made a big difference.
When you mentioned earlier about going to a 7-hour day and going to portal pay, that completely cut out the tonnage pay, didn't it?
Yeah.
So at what point did they go from a 7-hour day back to an 8-hour day?
Well, during the war, see, we even got up to a 9-hour day. Shifts overlapped. And then after the war, we went back to the 8-hour day.
When you had a union contract, what was typical? Did the rank and file have any input into negotiating a contract, or did John L. do that by himself?
No, he had the policy committee formed at all these, well, they wasn't from every local, but they was always one from this area right here that sat in on those negotiations and had their say in it too. Because one of my brother-in-laws, he went to a couple of them, and I was pretty well versed on some of the things they wanted, and they got it too. They had, because this place had a lot of influence on national contracts, and no doubt about it. And John L., I think he welcomed people from this area because they was well-kept mines there, way above the average. And he had good ideas about what it ought to be anyway. Pretty hard to fool that guy.
During the war, World War II, you mentioned you sometime went to longer shifts. Did you get overtime pay?
Yeah.
Did you ever strike during the war?
Yeah, they had a strike here one time, and most of us was ashamed of it, but John L., he endorsed it. He knowed pretty well what he's doing, I guess. It didn't hurt the production over in the United States, but if it had been prolonged, it would have. But he had some things he meant to get, and he got it.
So his timing was perfect.
Timing was perfect. And all the men admired him later, but at the time we felt a little bit bad about it, a little bit ashamed that it wouldn't required a national effort like the World War II did. Most of us didn't go for it because we thought it was a bad time to push it. But he thought otherwise, and it turned out he was right.
So by cutting off the coal supply during the war, when you needed coal to make the steel, to make the guns and airplanes, how did the community feel about that, and you workers, how did you feel about it?
Well, we didn't really like it. I don't think anybody really liked it that we went on strike at that time because the war wasn't going too well, for a while. And we were pretty patriotic around here. Most of us was at that time, and still are.
In the early 50s, Consolidation Coal Company, well, maybe it was late 40s, they started selling off the company houses and businesses. What did the people think at that? Did they think the company was going to desert them, or what?
No, excuse me, we had, Mac Foster was the president of this division then. He called all the salaried people in, about 500 of us, I guess, in the old office building, and told us what was coming. He said, we've married you here in this town, fleeced you, baked your bread, buried you, cut your hair, and sold you your groceries. And he said, it's time for us to get out. He said, we got things are going to change. He said, people, we don't want nothing other than coal mine to be our business. We're going to sell all our houses and give some of the property to the town. And it shocked everybody. You was in that meeting too, when you do it. And I couldn't believe it. I said, well, things are looking better. And that started like it did, and they started selling the houses and gave about all their equipment to the town that they had, and the churches, schools. Well, we was paying, I think, even then on our school tax, wasn't we, for independent schools. It was a little bit every payday they'd cut out for the schools. But that started people looking at things in a different way then. And people became more independent. you know, at one time, it never was in my lifetime here, but at one time, an outside peddler, we call them peddlers, that raise farm produce, come in and sell stuff, you know. And even they had what they call pack peddlers. People from Neon was a thriving community and had all those department stores. And on paydays, you'd see those managers or those stores or owners come in here with a great old big suitcase of a thing, big pack on their back, and that's where they got the name pack peddler. And they'd have clothes, you know, underclothes, and they go around house to house. And in a lot of communities, that wasn't allowed, but Consol, to my knowledge, I never know them forbid that. We always had the feeling that they didn't like it if we bought from people like that, but they never did stop nobody, that I remember. The farmers too. Now over in Virginia, that wasn't the case, because people over there, I had people lived over there in the Stone Neck and Coal Company's communities, and they wouldn't allow peddlers to come in there, and you had to buy your stuff from the company store. But that it never that drastic here in my lifetime. It may have been prior to my becoming aware, you know, of things, but I don't remember it. You know.
In the mid-1950s, Bethlehem Steel bought out Consolidation Coal Company's holdings in this area. What were your thoughts then about making that transition?
Well, for my part, of course, I'd decided to, you know, they started a new mine. I had, operated two of their experimental mines, and then after that, they started the 22 mine, Bethlehem called it, and we called it the Rock House mine. And I went over there later from one of the experimental mines, and the railroad came through at Dunham and shut down the experimental mine, the chill bump, and then they started the Wright mine behind the preparation plant, and we worked up there till it shut down. You know, they found out what they wanted to find out, and then we went over there. And the section I was on in '56, see, I quit. I went over to Clainsville. They had big high coal, and I said, bound to be a better place to work in this 30-inch coal, and so I quit. And that's when Bethlehem took over that year. I'd left in '55, and they took over in '56. A little after I went over there, and after I heard about what Bethlehem was paying, they had a higher wage scale for all the supervisory people, and they had benefits as unheard of. And I said, I made a mistake. But it's too late. I'd already made the change and went over there with them. I stayed over there 10 years. And the people that I kept up with, I still lived here. I moved over there and lived about a year over at Lebanon, Virginia, and then the family didn't like it, and we moved back. And they said they want to go home. I said, well, okay, we'll go back. And then when they started 26 mine, I came back over here and got me a job over here and started back. But they took that change over pretty good. Right at the beginning, they had their doubts, because I had brothers working here, and brother-in-laws, and a lot of friends at that time that worked in the mines, and they all liked Bethlehem. Was that your impression, Deward, when they changed over?
What was this experimental mining that you were talking about?
Well, they tried to console. I was young and had a lot of pep then, you know, and they wanted to see what low coal mining was like. So they started they called it the number 4 Elkhorn seam. They called it Whitesburg now. So they started to mine up on the hill above old number 6 and called it, it's so cold on that point in the winter, everybody talking about getting chill bumps, so they named it chill bump. That's what the men called it, chill bump. And we drove down the left side of Potter's Fork and turned off an entry, come down in behind the Smoky Road, and tried pillaring it, you know. it was a new experience for people. And I had people, went with me to come out of number 7 mine, and they wanted to see how men could work in low coal. And they seen it work pretty good, because we actually done pretty good. And started out with about a 5 man, went to Virginia, started their mine on Mead Creek, Clinchfield, and the mine foreman come around one day and said, well, we're going to have to shut our mine down. I said, why? He said, the railroad's going to come right through down here where we're shooting this coal down the hill to number 6. And he said, well, don't worry, we're going to start one over on the other side behind the preparation plant. So the railroad stopped that mine, and then we went over here and started experimenting over here with low coal equipment of different kind. He went back to the old duck bill. And of course we had the joy loader and tried it. And just to see if we could really work in low coal. And they found out we could. And because they knew they had a lot of low coal at 22 mine, or Rock House, and they had to have people can bend their back and work in that kind of coal. That's actually why they had those 2 experimental mines, or that's the reason I assumed.
Through most of my career, we've been using roof bolts and resin rods to support the roof. When was that first introduced into mining?
While I was working in Marshall's branch at 204 mine, and when they started the roof bolts, and of course they started the rumors, that roof bolts was the thing, and been used in steel mines in Alabama, and been there since the 1920s, and we circulated all that around, and everybody, you'd hear different opinions, but impossible. How could it hold the roof up? See, that's the concept men had it. You had to hold it up. But they came out there on what they called the Fireview, and they drove this entry in. We used the cross collars made out of wood, and that's nothing but big trees cut down, 14, 16, 18-foot lengths, and be on 4-foot centers with wooden posts. That's the way we supported the bad top. And they started out through there bolting it where this was, and that's the first roof bolting we ever done. And they bolted the whole entry up. And then they come back and took all the crossbars out. Everybody said it'll fall in, you wait and see. Well, they took it out and everything was just fine. And that, without saying another word, everybody took it right then and there that was the best way to do it. And after it was explained to him, what you're doing is bolting several rock layers together and forming a solid beam, and that is what's holding the roof up. It's not something under it supporting it. You're just creating a beam. And the men really went for it. And I had the privilege, or the task, I guess, for Clinchfield, to introduce the roof bolt in their mine at Lick Fork, Termos 1 mine. And when I went over there, they said, you're the very man we were looking for. You've been used to roof bolting, and these men won't take it. They're afraid of it. And I worked with this crew for a while and talked about how good everything was at number 4 where I'd worked. And I finally told the mine foreman one day, I said, I believe we try a few of these bolts out there just the same way we did at Jenkins, and convince them, let them see for themselves that it'll hold the roof.
Who made that first bolt machine?
Well, actually, we started out with a cutting machine, took a hand drill, and strapped it on the cutter bar of the cutting machine, and used it to lever it up, and drill with it. Then the machine shop got the idea of that drill was like Letcher came out with later, and nicknamed it the Baker.
So the first machine was built right here in Jenkins?
Right here in Jenkins, at the machine shop.
That's very interesting. Tell me a little bit about your career. How long did you work in the mines?
Well, at about 45 and a half years. I was getting up close to 46 years.
And you ended with Beth Elkhorn Corporation?
Yeah.
And I take it in talking with you, you must have spent most of that time in management.
Yeah, out of 45 and a half years, I was in management 36 of that time. And had a wonderful experience, really, with a lot of different people, a lot of different things, and went through all those changes. And looking back on it, it's something really to think about.
If you had it to do over, would you still choose coal mining as your career?
Yeah, I believe I would, because I had opportunities just from the experience that I gained as a miner. I could have left here and got a pretty good job one time with Chrysler, and I turned it down. I said, you don't pay enough. I beat that in Jenkins.
What about your kids? How many kids you have?
I had 4 girls and 5 boys.
And your sons coal miners? Or daughters?
Only one of them. The one boy that come back from the Marine Corps, and I already knew about 26, you know, and I was traveling back and forth from over the Moss 3 mine in Virginia, and he went to work with me one day, and I said, we would go back, we'll go around through Elkhorn City, and we'll go up by that 26 mine where they's already constructing the buildings. And we parked the car down on the highway. They had the gate.
No, we really appreciate you being with us here today. We're out of time, and maybe Rick can edit out a minute somewhere else so we can put, you have any final comments about your career in coal mining, about the coal mining community?
Well, it proved to be a pretty interesting thing in my life, and I know other people has too. And there is a career in mining, and of course big mines like what I've had the experience with is over. I don't guess there'll ever be many more. It may be someday, but as a career in my lifetime, it's been a great experience.
Yeah.
I earned good wages, made a good living.
I want to thank you for being here with us today and sharing all those memories with us. We sure appreciate you.
Well, it's been interesting to share them with you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.